My father defended that basement cabinet like a sentry for 33 years. I never dared to touch the brass padlock until the day we buried him, standing in the damp dark. My husband joked about prying it open, but my 4-year-old daughter froze us both. She pointed a trembling finger and whispered, "Don't open the locked one, Daddy." That was when I knew the silence in this house was not peace, but a lie waiting to scream. The drive back to Maple Ridge felt less like a return home and more like a slow descent into deep, stagnant water. The wipers on our station wagon slapped a rhythmic, hypnotic beat against the windshield, battling a gray drizzle that had followed us all the way from the city. I sat in the passenger seat, staring out at the blur of pines and wet asphalt, while my husband, Daniel, kept both hands gripped tight on the wheel. In the back seat, my 4-year-old daughter, Lily, was finally asleep, her small head lolling against the side of her car seat, clutching a worn-out plush rabbit my mother had bought her 2 Christmases ago. I was 33 years old. I was a nurse who managed a busy trauma ward. I was trained to handle death, to organize chaos, and to keep my head when the world was falling apart. But as we passed the rusted welcome sign of the town I had spent 18 years trying to escape, I felt like a child again, small and terrified. My parents, Thomas and Elaine Price, were dead. It was a sentence I had repeated to myself 100 times in the last 48 hours, trying to make the words sound like reality. They had been driving home from the grocery store on Highway 9, a road my father had driven 5,000 times. A slick patch of oil, a drift into the oncoming lane, a collision with a delivery truck. It was over in seconds. The state trooper who called me said they likely never knew what happened. He meant it as a comfort. To me, it sounded like a theft. We pulled into the gravel driveway of the small, white-clapboard house where I had grown up. It looked smaller than I remembered, the paint peeling slightly around the window frames. The flower beds my mother tended with religious devotion now sodden and drooping in the rain. Daniel turned off the ignition. The silence that rushed into the car was deafening. He reached over and squeezed my hand. "You do not have to do this all at once. Eleanor," he said softly, "we can just go inside and rest." I nodded. Though I knew there would be no rest, the house was waiting. When I unlocked the front door, the smell hit me first. It was a specific cocktail of lemon furniture polish, old paper, and the faint metallic scent of my father's work clothes. He owned a small auto repair shop on the edge of town, and the smell of grease and iron was as much a part of him as his skin. Seeing his boots lined up neatly by the door, right where he had kicked them off for the last time, knocked the wind out of me. I stood in the entryway, paralyzed. The guilt was a physical weight in my chest. Heavy and suffocating. I had not visited in 6 months. I had been too busy. My career in the city was demanding, and the drive was long. And Daniel and I had our own struggles, our own life. Every time my mother called, asking when we would bring Lily down, I had an excuse. "Next month, Mom," I would say. "Things are just crazy at the hospital right now." Next month never came, and now, standing in the hallway, I realized that my last conversation with my father had been an argument. He had made a comment about how much I worked, how the city was changing me, making me hard. I had snapped back, telling him he did not understand ambition, that I did not want to live a small life in a small town. I had not spoken to him since. Mummy Lily's voice was small and groggy. I turned to see Daniel carrying her in. I forced a smile, wiping my eyes quickly. "We are here." "Bug," I said. "This is Grandma and Grandpa's house." Lily looked around with wide, confused eyes. "Where are they?" she asked. The question felt like a knife. Daniel exchanged a look with me, a silent agreement that we would handle the hardest explanations later. "They are not here right now." "Sweetie," Daniel said, setting her down, "why don't you go look at the toys in the living room? I bet Grandma left some out for you," as Lily trotted off. Daniel put his arm around me. I leaned into him, grateful for his warmth. The house felt cold, a tomb of memories. We spent the next 2 hours moving in a daze. bringing in our suitcases, checking the fridge, which was heartbreakingly full of food that would now go to waste, a carton of milk with an expiration date 2 weeks away, a pot of soup covered in foil. "We have to start sorting," I said, staring at the stack of mail on the kitchen counter. "The funeral is in 3 days. I cannot leave all this for later." Daniel nodded. "I will take the basement and the garage," he said. "You handle the bedrooms and the paperwork. We will meet in the middle." I knew he was trying to protect me. The basement was my father's domain. It was where he tinkered, where he kept his tools, his fishing gear, and the things he did not want cluttering the main house. It was a masculine space, dark and earth-smelling. I spent the afternoon in my parents' bedroom, sifting through clothes. Every shirt I folded, every trinket I touched, sent a fresh wave of grief crashing over me. I found a birthday card they had bought for Lily, hidden in a drawer, ready for next month. It was signed in my mother's looping handwriting, "To our precious angel. Love, Grandma and Grandpa." I had to sit on the edge of the bed and breathe through my mouth to stop from screaming. Around 4 in the afternoon, I went downstairs to check on Daniel. I found him in the basement, surrounded by cardboard boxes. The basement was a large, unfinished space with concrete floors and exposed beams. Along one wall stood a row of heavy wooden cabinets that my father had built himself years ago. They were stained a dark walnut color. Sturdy and imposing, Daniel was whistling a low tune, stacking old magazines into a recycling bin. Lily was sitting on a rug nearby, playing with a set of rusty washers she had found on the floor, pretending they were coins. "Hey," I said, descending the wooden stairs. "How is it going down here?" Daniel looked up and wiped sweat from his forehead. "It is a time capsule. Eleanor, your dad kept every issue of Mechanics Weekly since 1985. I smiled weakly. He hated throwing things away. He said you never knew when you might need a spare part. Daniel gestured to the wall of cabinets. "I have gone through most of the shelving units. Just tools, old tax returns, some holiday decorations, but I cannot get into that one on the end." He pointed to the cabinet on the far right. My stomach gave a strange, involuntary lurch. It was a tall, narrow cabinet, different from the others, while the rest had simple magnetic latches. This one was secured with a heavy brass padlock. The wood around the hasp was worn smooth, darker than the rest, as if it had been touched thousands of times. I remembered that cabinet. It was a fixture of my childhood, a monolith of mystery. I remembered being 5 years old, reaching for the lock, and my father's voice booming across the basement, sharper than I had ever heard it. "Eleanor, no." I had recoiled, terrified. He had never yelled like that. He had come over, his face pale, and knelt down to my eye level. He took my hands in his rough, calloused ones. "Listen to me, Ellie," he had said, his voice trembling slightly. "You are never to touch that cabinet. Not ever. It is dangerous. Do you understand?" I had nodded, tears stinging my eyes. I never touched it again. Over the years, the prohibition became just another fact of life. Like gravity or the sunrise, that cabinet was Dad's. It was off limits. I stopped wondering about it, assuming it held dangerous chemicals for the shop, or perhaps a gun, though I never saw him with one. Now, standing there as a grown woman, the sight of that brass padlock triggered a primal, childish anxiety in my gut. "It is probably just boring paperwork," Daniel said, walking over to it, or maybe his secret stash of expensive scotch. He reached out and rattled the lock. It held firm. "I should probably pry it off," Daniel said, reaching for a crowbar that lay on the work table. "We need to inventory everything. Right? Let us see what the old man was hiding." He was joking, his tone light, trying to break the morbid tension of the day. He raised the crowbar, grinning at me. "Don't," I said, the word coming out sharper than I intended. Daniel paused, looking at me with surprise. "Eleanor." And then, a small voice spoke from the floor. Grandpa said, "Don't open the locked one." "Daddy." The air in the basement seemed to drop 10 degrees. I turned slowly to look at Lily. She was not looking at us. She was stacking her washers, her expression completely placid, almost bored. Daniel lowered the crowbar slowly. He looked at Lily, then at me. What did you say? Bug? Lily looked up, her blue eyes clear and unblinking. She pointed a small finger at the cabinet. Grandpa said, "Don't open the locked one." My heart began to hammer against my ribs. Lily, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, when did Grandpa tell you that? She shrugged. Returning to her game, when we were playing, he said it is bad. He said don't touch. I stared at her. My father had barely seen Lily in the last year. We had visited briefly at Christmas, and they had come to the city once for her birthday. When would he have had a moment alone with her in this basement? And why would he burden a 4-year-old with that warning? It made no sense. My father was protective, obsessive even. But he was not cruel. He would not scare a child, unless he was scared himself. I looked back at the cabinet. It stood there, silent and imposing. The brass lock glinting under the single bulb hanging from the ceiling. Leave it, Daniel, I whispered. Daniel looked at the cabinet, then at me. He saw the genuine fear in my face. Okay, he said softly. We will leave it for now. We went back upstairs. But the feeling of the basement followed me. It clung to my skin like the damp cold of the rain. The next morning, the sky was a bruised purple, threatening more rain. We had an appointment at 10 o'clock with Mr. Henderson, the attorney who had handled my parents' affairs for as long as I could remember. His office was on Main Street, sandwiched between a bakery and a hardware store. It smelled of peppermint and dust. Mr. Henderson was a man in his 70s, with skin like crinkled parchment and a suit that looked 2 sizes too big. He offered us coffee in styrofoam cups and sat us down across his cluttered desk. I am so sorry. Eleanor, he said, shaking his head. Thomas and Elaine were good people. The best. This town is going to miss them. Thank you. Mr. Henderson, I said, gripping my coffee cup. We need to understand where things stand. I know they didn't have much. My parents had always lived frugally. The auto shop kept food on the table. But there were never vacations, never new cars. My clothes were often secondhand until I was old enough to work part-time. I had put myself through nursing school with loans and scholarships because I knew they could not help. Mr. Henderson put on his reading glasses and opened a thick file. Well, it is fairly straightforward, he said. You are the sole beneficiary. You inherit the house, which is fully paid off. You inherit the shop, though I understand there are some outstanding debts to suppliers there, and there is a small savings account with about $12,000 in it. I nodded. That was about what I expected, maybe even a little more. However, Mr. Henderson continued, running his finger down a ledger page. There is one thing I wanted to clarify with you. I was reviewing the bank statements for the estate tax filing, and I noticed a recurring withdrawal that has been going on for a very long time. He turned the ledger around so I could see. Here, he pointed. Every month, on the 1st of the month, a check was issued. It is labeled simply, Family Support. I squinted at the numbers. The amount varied slightly over the years, adjusting for inflation it seemed, but it was significant. $500 a month in the beginning, then $700, then $1,000. Who was it going to? I asked, frowning. That is the odd part. Mr. Henderson said, the checks were made out to cash, or sometimes to a generic account number, but looking at the records, this payment has been made every single month for exactly 32 years. The last payment was cleared 3 days before the accident. I did the math in my head. 32 years. I was 33. The payment started when I was 1 year old. Family support. I looked at Daniel. Did they have relatives I didn't know about? Someone sick. Daniel shook his head. You said they were only children. Your grandparents died before you were born. I know. I said. I looked back at the lawyer. Mr. Henderson. My parents were always struggling. I remember months where we ate pasta with butter for a week straight because the shop was slow. If they were sending $1,000 a month to someone, how is that even possible? Where did the money come from? Mr. Henderson looked uncomfortable. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. That is what I cannot quite figure out. Eleanor, the shop made money. yes, but not enough to sustain this kind of outflow and cover their living expenses. It looks like, well, it looks like there were deposits coming in from another source to cover it, but those records are incomplete. He handed me a photocopy of a bank statement from 10 years ago. I saw a deposit labeled simply Trust Distribution, followed immediately by the withdrawal for family support. It was a pass-through. My parents were not paying the money. They were moving it, but moving it for whom and to whom, the phrase family support, gnawed at me. It sounded benevolent, charitable, but the secrecy, the duration, it felt heavy. 32 years of silence. We left the lawyer's office with more questions than answers. The rain had started again, a steady, miserable drizzle. Daniel drove us back to the house, and I spent the ride staring out the window, trying to reconcile the parents I knew, the hard-working, simple couple who clipped coupons and fixed their own plumbing, with the people in that ledger. When we got home, Daniel took Lily to the living room to watch cartoons. I walked into my father's study. It was a small room off the kitchen, filled with the smell of pipe tobacco, though he hadn't smoked in 20 years. I sat at his desk. It was a heavy oak piece, scarred and stained. I ran my hand over the surface, imagining him sitting here late at night, balancing the checkbook, worrying about the bills. I started opening drawers, pens, paper clips, old calendars, a stack of unpaid invoices for the shop. It was all so mundane. Then I reached the back of the bottom drawer. It didn't slide out all the way. Something was jamming it. I reached my hand in, feeling around in the darkness behind the track. My fingers brushed against paper. I pulled it out. It was a small, cream-colored envelope. It was sealed. On the front, in my father's distinct, blocky handwriting, were the words, "Basement. Only when you're ready." My breath hitched. I knew, with absolute certainty, what was inside. I tore the envelope open. A single silver key slid out into my palm. It was small, flat, and unremarkable, but it felt hot against my skin. I stared at the words on the envelope again. "Only when you're ready." Ready for what? "Dad," I whispered to the empty room. He had known. He had known that one day I would be sitting here, and he would be gone, and that the cabinet would be the only thing left between me and the truth. I put the key in my pocket. I did not tell Daniel. I went into the kitchen and made lunch for Lily, forcing myself to smile, to chop carrots, to be a mother. But my mind was in the basement. That night, the house settled into a creaking silence. Daniel and Lily were asleep upstairs. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind rattle the window frames. The key was on the nightstand, sitting on top of my phone. It seemed to hum in the darkness. I could not sleep. The phrase 32 years kept looping in my mind. The image of Lily pointing at the cabinet, the look on Mr. Henderson's face, at 1 o'clock in the morning. I threw off the covers. I put on my robe and slippers. I picked up the key. I walked down the hallway, the floorboards groaning under my weight. The house felt watchful. I went into the kitchen, turned on the light, and opened the door to the basement. The air that wafted up was cool and smelled of earth. I flipped the switch, and the single bulb at the bottom of the stairs flickered to life, casting long, dancing shadows against the concrete walls. I walked down the stairs, one by one. My heart was beating a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Thump, thump, thump. I reached the bottom and turned to face the row of cabinets. There it was, the locked one. I walked toward it. My slippers made a soft scuffing sound on the concrete. I stopped 2 feet away. The brass padlock looked dull in the yellow light. I reached into my pocket and took out the key. My hand was trembling. I stepped closer. I could see the grain of the wood, the scratches around the hasp. I reached out and held the padlock. It was cold and heavy. I raised the key. I aligned it with the slot, and then I froze. A wave of nausea rolled over me. It was a physical sensation of dread so potent it nearly knocked me over. I had the sudden, terrifying clarity that the moment I turned this key, my life as I knew it would end. The Eleanor Price who was a nurse, a wife, a daughter of Thomas and Elaine, she would cease to exist. Something else would take her place. Only when you're ready. Was I ready? I thought of Lily sleeping upstairs. I thought of the grief that was already drowning me. I thought of the fragile peace of my memories. I lowered my hand. I stepped back. Then another step. I cannot do it. I whispered, not tonight. I turned and ran up the stairs, fleeing the basement as if a monster were snapping at my heels. I locked the basement door behind me and leaned against it, gasping for breath. I went back to bed and curled into a ball next to Daniel, burying my face in his back, wishing for the morning to erase the fear. But the morning brought no relief. It was gray and wet again. We were eating breakfast in the kitchen, toast and scrambled eggs that tasted like cardboard when the doorbell rang. I jumped, spilling coffee on the table. I will get it, Daniel said, grabbing a napkin to dab at the spill. He went to the door and returned a moment later, holding a thick, rigid envelope. Certified mail, he said, looking at the return address. It is for your dad. He handed it to me. I looked at the label. Thomas Price, 142 Oak Street, Maple Ridge. And in the top left corner, the sender, Harborview Legal Group, Harborview. State of Maine. I had never heard of Harborview. It was 3 states away. Stamped across the front in red ink were the words, Second Notice Urgent. I stared at the envelope. My father was a mechanic in a small town. He did not get urgent legal notices from law firms in Maine. He did not have business 3 states away. I looked at the date on the postmark. It was mailed 4 days ago, the day before they died. I felt a cold prickle on the back of my neck. The secrets in this house were not just locked in the basement. They were arriving by mail. They were in the bank ledgers. They were everywhere. I looked at Daniel. Open it, he said softly. I slid my finger under the flap. The sound of the paper tearing was loud in the quiet kitchen. I pulled out the letter. It was a single page, formal and dense with legal jargon. But one sentence in the middle jumped out at me, bold and undeniable. Regarding the trust administration of beneficiary A, Lane/Price. Immediate action required regarding cessation of monthly support allocation. I dropped the letter on the table. Lane/Price. Price was my name. Who was Lane? And why was my father administering a trust for them? I looked at the basement door. The key was still in my pocket, heavy as a stone. I knew then that I could not run away. The cabinet was not just a box of old papers. It was the answer to a question I had not even known to ask. And I was going to have to open it. The silence in the house was absolute. Daniel had taken Lily to the playground down by the creek, sensing that I needed an hour of solitude to process the funeral arrangements, or perhaps simply to stare at the wall and breathe. He did not know that the moment the front door clicked shut behind them, I would be moving toward the basement door. I felt like an intruder in my own childhood home. The certified letter from Harborview Legal Group was folded inside my pocket, its sharp corners digging into my hip. Immediate action required. The words had been shouting at me all morning. I unlocked the basement door. The air that rose to meet me was cool and smelled of damp concrete and the specific, dusty sweetness of old lumber. I descended the stairs slowly, counting them as I went, 1, 2, 3, all the way to 12. The single bulb overhead cast a jaundiced yellow light over the space. The row of cabinets stood like silent sentinels along the far wall. I walked straight to the locked one. It looked no different than it had yesterday. Or 20 years ago. The wood was dark and scarred, the brass padlock dull with age. My hand did not shake this time. The anxiety was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was overridden by a fierce, driving need to know. The letter had shattered the illusion that ignorance was safety. I was already unsafe. I was already involved. I slid the small silver key into the padlock. It met a little resistance, grit grinding inside the mechanism. But with a firm twist, the shackle popped open. The sound was loud, a sharp clack that echoed off the concrete walls. I unhooked the lock and set it on the workbench. I took a breath, held it, and pulled the cabinet door open. The hinges groaned. I expected an avalanche of secrets to spill out, but the interior was anticlimactic. The shelves were mostly bare. There was a thick layer of dust coating the wood, On the top shelf, there were a few empty jars and a rusted flashlight, but on the bottom shelf, pushed all the way to the back, sat a gray metal box. It was a fireproof document safe, the kind you buy at an office supply store to protect deeds and insurance policies. It was heavy. I dragged it out, the metal scraping against the wood, and lifted it onto the workbench under the light. There was no keyhole on this box. Instead, there was a digital keypad, the buttons worn and faded from use. I stared at it. I did not have a code. Panic flared for a second. Had my father left me the key to the cabinet only to block me with a second lock? It seemed cruel. Then I saw it. A small strip of masking tape stuck to the side of the box. In my father's handwriting, in blue ballpoint pen, were the words, "Same combination as the shop safe." I let out a breath that was half laugh, half sob. Of course, Thomas Price was a creature of habit. He did not trust new numbers. He trusted the ones that had worked for him for 40 years. I knew the shop safe combination. I had worked the front desk at the auto shop for 3 summers in high school. I opened that safe every morning to get the cash drawer ready. 1982, the year he opened the business. I reached out and pressed the buttons. 1, 9, 8, 2. The box beeped a high, electronic chirp, and the latch clicked. I lifted the lid. The smell of old paper drifted up. The box was packed tight. I started pulling things out, laying them on the dusty workbench. First, a stack of envelopes. They were all from Harborview Legal Group and another entity called Harborview Trust Services. There were dozens of them, banded together by year. Some were unopened. Others had been slid open and stuffed back in. Next, a small, velvet jewelry pouch. I opened it and tipped the contents into my hand. It was a hospital identification bracelet. The plastic was yellowed and brittle. I smoothed it out to read the typed insert. Baby Girl Lane, D.O.B. October 14th, 1992. Harborview General Hospital. My blood ran cold. My birthday was October 14th, 1992. But my birth certificate, the one I had needed for nursing school, for my marriage license, for everything listed my place of birth as Maple Ridge Community Hospital, and it listed my name as Eleanor Marie Price, who was Baby Girl Lane. I knew the answer before I even finished the thought. I dug deeper into the box. I found a Polaroid photograph. It was dark, taken in low light, showing a newborn baby wrapped in a generic hospital blanket. The baby's face was red and squashed, eyes squeezed shut, on the white border at the bottom. Someone had written in black marker, Baby A, Lane/Price. The word Lane had been faintly crossed out with a single line, as if someone had tried to erase it but changed their mind. My hands were trembling now. I set the photo down next to the bracelet. At the bottom of the stack was a thick document stapled into a blue legal cover. It looked official, formidable. The title page read, Private Support Agreement and Waiver of Parental Rights. I flipped it open. The date was October 16th, 1992, 2 days after I was born. The parties listed were Thomas and Elaine Price, referred to as the adoptive guardians, and a woman named Rebecca Lane, referred to as the biological mother. Rebecca Lane. The name meant nothing to me. I rolled it around in my mind, tasting the syllables. Rebecca Lane. Was she the woman who had held me for 2 days? Was she the one who had crossed out her own name on the photo I began to read? The legalese was dense, but the meaning was brutally clear. In consideration of the permanent and irrevocable transfer of all parental rights regarding the female infant born October 14th, 1992, and in consideration of the strict confidentiality regarding the identity of the biological mother and the circumstances of conception, the Harborview Trust agrees to provide a monthly support stipend to the adoptive guardians for a period of 32 years, commencing on November 1st, 1992. 32 years. The exact duration of the payments. Mr. Henderson had found in the bank ledger, but the document went on. It detailed the conditions of the support. It was not just for raising me, it was for silence. The adoptive guardians agreed to relocate the infant to their primary residence in Maple Ridge and to sever all ties with the municipality of Harborview. No contact is to be initiated with the biological mother or any associates of the Keene family. Keene family, I scanned the page. There was another signature at the bottom. Next to a witness line, Clifford Ames, attorney at law. I looked back at the stack of letters. Harborview Legal Group. Clifford Ames. This was not an adoption. This was a transaction. I had grown up believing I was adopted through a church agency in the next county. My parents had told me the story 100 times, a young mother who couldn't care for me. A loving choice, a standard process. They made it sound simple and holy. This document made it sound like a cover-up. I felt a wave of nausea. My parents, my decent, honest, hard-working parents had signed a contract to take me and keep a secret in exchange for money. It felt impossible. It felt like a betrayal of everything they had ever taught me about integrity. I pushed the papers aside, needing to look at something else. Anything else. Beneath the legal documents lay 2 black VHS tapes. One was unmarked, its label peeled off, leaving a sticky residue. The other had a white adhesive label on the spine. In my mother's handwriting looping. Careful cursive it read, "For Eleanor, when you're ready." And taped to the top of the cassette was a yellow index card that said simply, "Play privately." I stared at the tape. My mother's voice was trapped in that magnetic ribbon. I needed to hear it, right now. I grabbed the tape and ran up the stairs, locking the basement door behind me. I went into the living room. We did not have a VCR connected to the television. Nobody did anymore. But I knew where one was. My father had kept an old Panasonic unit in a box in the hallway closet, intending to digitize our home movies one day, a project he never started. I tore through the closet, throwing aside winter coats and vacuum attachments until I found the box. I hauled the VCR out and carried it to the living room. My hands were shaking so badly I could hardly plug the cables into the back of the TV. Red, white, yellow. I jammed them into the ports. I plugged the power cord into the wall. The VCR hummed to life, a blinking 1200 flashing on its display. I pushed the tape into the slot. The machine swallowed it with a mechanical thunk whir. I grabbed the TV remote and switched the input. Static hissed on the screen. A blizzard of black and white noise. I pressed play. The static cleared. The image rolled for a second, then stabilized. The quality was grainy, the colors slightly washed out. Typical of early 90s camcorders. The shot was of our old living room. I recognized the floral pattern of the sofa instantly. Sitting there, looking impossibly young, were my parents. My father had a full head of dark hair and no beard. He was wearing a plaid shirt that looked new. My mother was wearing a blue dress, her hair teased up in that way she used to wear it. She looked nervous. She was twisting a tissue in her hands. They were looking directly at the camera. My father cleared his throat. "Is it recording?" he asked, leaning forward. His face filled the screen for a moment. "Out of focus. The red light is on." "Tom," my mother's voice said. "Sit back." He sat back. He put his arm around her shoulders. They looked like 2 kids playing house, scared and solemn. My mother took a deep breath. She looked straight into the lens. "Eleanor," she said. Hearing her voice, so young and clear, made tears spring to my eyes. "Eleanor," she said again, "if you are watching this, it means we couldn't find the right time to tell you ourselves. Or maybe we are not around to tell you." She looked down at her hands, then back at the camera. "We love you so much. Honey, you have to know that first. You are our daughter, in every way that matters." My father nodded beside her. His jaw was set tight. "We did what we had to do. Ellie, we wanted a family, and they made it possible. But it came with strings," my mother cut in. "We promised to protect you. That was the most important part. To protect you from the mess back in Harborview. But we also promised to keep the truth from you until you were old enough to understand." She paused, biting her lip. "There is a man named Clifford Ames," she said, "and a family named Keene. They are powerful people. Eleanor, and your birth mother, Rebecca. She wanted you to have a safe life, a life away from them." My mother's eyes filled with tears on the screen, But we signed papers. She whispered, "We took their money. We told ourselves it was for your future. But it feels wrong. And if they ever come back, if they ever try to change the deal..." She looked at my father. "Tom, you tell her about the money." My father leaned forward. "The money in the trust. Ellie, it is not just support. It is..." And then, with a sharp crackle, the screen went to static. No. I sat up, gripping the remote. No, no, no. I pressed fast forward. Static. I pressed rewind and played the last 10 seconds again. It is not just support. It is... Pfft. Static. The tape had been recorded over, or damaged, or erased. I ejected the tape and looked at the magnetic ribbon. It looked crinkled in one section, as if the machine had eaten it years ago and someone had manually wound it back in. I sat back on my heels, staring at the gray noise on the TV screen. They made it possible, but it came with strings. We took their money. My parents were not just victims of a secret, they were participants. They had taken money from this Keene family and this lawyer, Clifford Ames, to raise me in hiding. I felt a sudden, desperate need to talk to someone who knew them, someone who had been there. Jonah. My brother Jonah was 7 years older than me. He would have been 8 years old when I was brought home. He would have remembered. I grabbed my phone. My hands were cold. I dialed his number. He answered on the second ring. "Ellie. Everything okay?" He sounded tired. He had been handling the arrangements with the funeral home all morning. "Jonah," I said, "I need you to tell me the truth." There was a pause. "What are you talking about? I found the cabinet. Jonah, the locked one in the basement." The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. "You opened it?" he asked. His voice was guarded. "Yes," I said. "I opened it. I found the agreement. I found the letters from Harborview. I found the tape. Jonah, Mom and Dad. They recorded a tape." He let out a long, ragged sigh. It sounded like he had been holding his breath for 20 years. "Did you know?" I asked. "Did you know about the money? Did you know about Rebecca Lane?" Jonah did not answer immediately. I could hear the background noise of his house, his kids arguing over a video game, the hum of his refrigerator. "Jonah," I snapped. "I didn't know the details." "Eleanor," he said finally. "I was 8, but I knew things were weird." "What do you mean, weird?" "I remember when they brought you home," he said. "It wasn't like a normal adoption. There was no social worker coming to the house. Dad just drove off one night in the truck and came back 2 days later with you in a car seat. And they were scared. They were jumpy for months. Every time the phone rang, Mom would jump a foot in the air. Why didn't you ever tell me?" I demanded. "Because they made me promise." Jonah's voice rose. "They sat me down at the kitchen table. Dad looked me in the eye and said, 'Jonah, Eleanor is your sister now, but you never talk about where she came from. Not to the neighbors, not to your friends, and never, ever to her. If you do, bad men might come and take her away.'" I shivered. Bad men. I was a kid. "Ellie," Jonah said, his voice softening. "I was terrified. I thought the government was going to come steal you. So I locked it away, but you must have heard things later." I pressed. "When you were older." He hesitated. "Jonah?" "Okay. Yes," he said. "When I was in high school. I heard them arguing in the bedroom late at night. I heard Dad shouting about Ames and blood money. I heard Mom crying, saying they had no choice, that the shop was going under and they needed the transfer." He paused. "I asked Dad about it once. Just once. I was 18. I asked him who Ames was. What did he say?" He looked at me like I had slapped him. He said, "If you love your sister, you will never speak that name again. That part of our life is buried." Jonah took a breath. "And now you have dug it up." "I didn't dig it up." "Jonah," I said, furious tears spilling onto my cheeks. "It was sent to me. I got a letter from Harborview. They are cutting off the money, and I found a bracelet that says I was born in a different city to a woman named Lane. My whole life is a fabrication." "Jonah, Ellie, listen to me," he said, urgent. "Stop. Just stop." "What?" "Put the papers back in the box. Lock the cabinet. Forget you saw it." "Are you crazy?" I asked. "How can I forget this? Because they are dead." Eleanor, he shouted, Mom and Dad are dead. They loved you. They raised you. They were good parents. Whatever deal they made it 30 years ago. If you go poking around in this, if you start chasing down lawyers and rich families in Harborview, you are going to destroy their memory. You are going to turn them into criminals. I don't care about their reputation right now, I said, my voice trembling. I care about the truth. I have a right to know who I am. You are Eleanor Price, Jonah said firmly. You are my sister. That is who you are. Don't let some piece of paper change that. Please, Ellie, just leave it alone. Bury it with them. I looked at the TV screen, still buzzing with gray static. I looked at the hospital bracelet in my hand. Baby girl Lane. I can't. Jonah, I whispered. Ellie, I have to go. I hung up the phone. I sat there in the living room, the silence rushing back in to fill the space where my brother's voice had been. He wanted me to protect the lie. He wanted to preserve the sanctity of the family we had been. But that family was a ghost. I looked at the stack of letters from Harborview Legal Group. There was an address on the letterhead, 101 Main Street, Harborview, and a name, Clifford Ames. I stood up. I walked over to the VCR and ejected the tape. I put it carefully back into its case. Jonah was wrong. Backing away was not an option. The door was open. The locked one was unlocked. And whatever monster was inside, it was already out. The laptop screen glowed with a harsh blue light in the dim kitchen, illuminating the scattered remains of my parents' secret life. I had spent the last 6 hours searching for a ghost. Harborview Legal Group, the firm that had sent the letters and drafted the agreement, did not exist. At least, not anymore. According to the state business registry, the firm had dissolved 15 years ago. It was a dead end, a corporate corpse left to rot. But corporations are made of people, and people leave trails. I spent another hour digging through bar association records, cross-referencing names from the letterhead I found in the lockbox. Most of them were dead or retired in Florida, but one name stood out, Clifford Ames, the man who had signed the agreement, the man my mother had mentioned on the tape with fear in her voice. He was listed as inactive status, retired. His address was updated 2 years ago to a facility called Cedar Grove Senior Living in a town called Oak Haven, just across the state line. It was a 3-hour drive from Maple Ridge. I stared at the address. He was alive. He was within reach. Daniel walked into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from his eyes. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. He looked at the papers spread out over the table, the trust documents, the hospital bracelet, the terrifying agreement, and then he looked at me. You found him, didn't you? He asked. I nodded. He is in a nursing home 3 hours away. Daniel pulled out a chair and sat down next to me. He put his hand over mine, still resting on the mouse. We will go in the morning, he said. I asked, Daniel, you have to watch Lily, and the funeral is the day after tomorrow. I will call Mrs. Higgins next door to watch Lily for the day. Daniel said firmly, she loves her, and I am not letting you drive 3 hours to confront a stranger alone. Eleanor, you are running on adrenaline and grief. You need a co-pilot. I squeezed his hand, grateful for his steady presence. Thank you, I whispered. We left at 7 in the morning. The drive was tense. The landscape shifted from the rolling hills of Maple Ridge to the flatter, industrial gray of the neighboring state. I clutched a folder in my lap containing the private support agreement and the photo of baby Lane. I felt like I was carrying a bomb. Cedar Grove Senior Living was a sprawling, sterile complex of brick and glass surrounded by manicured lawns that looked too green to be real. It smelled of antiseptic and lavender air freshener, a scent designed to mask the underlying odor of decay. At the front desk, a cheerful young woman with bright pink fingernails looked up Ames in the computer. Oh, Mr. Ames, she said. He is in the solarium. He likes to watch the birds in the morning. Just be gentle with him. He has good days and bad days. His memory is a bit Swiss cheese, if you know what I mean. We walked down a long corridor lined with handrails. In the solarium, a glass-walled room filled with plastic plants and wicker furniture. A dozen elderly residents were dozing or staring out at the feeders. I spotted him immediately. He looked smaller than I expected, in my mind. Clifford Ames was a monster, a titan of legal coercion who had forced my parents into a 32-year contract. The man in the wheelchair was frail, draped in a knitted blanket, his skin spotted with age. He was wearing a cardigan that was buttoned wrong. He was watching a cardinal peck at a seed bell with intense, childlike concentration. I stopped 10 feet away. My heart hammered against my ribs. "Mr. Ames," I said. He did not move. "Mr. Ames," I said, louder this time. He turned his head slowly. His eyes were watery and pale blue, rimmed with red. He looked at Daniel, then he looked at me. His gaze drifted over my face, uninterested at first, then it snagged. He blinked. He leaned forward, his hands gripping the armrests of his wheelchair. The confusion in his eyes cleared, replaced by a spark of sudden, sharp recognition. "Rebecca," he whispered. The name hit me like a physical blow. "No," I said, stepping closer. "I am not Rebecca." He stared at me, his mouth slightly open. "You look just like her," he murmured. "The eyes, the chin. You have her chin." He reached out a shaking hand as if to touch my face. "Rebecca's girl," he said. "You are Rebecca's girl. You finally found me." I pulled a chair over and sat down directly in front of him. Daniel stood behind me, a silent guard. "My name is Eleanor," I said, "but I was born Baby Lane. You handled my adoption. You handled the trust." Ames dropped his hand. He let out a dry, rattling chuckle that turned into a cough. "Adoption," he wheezed. "Is that what they told you?" I opened the folder and placed the private support agreement on the small table between us. The paper looked stark and white against the dark wicker. "This is your signature." "Isn't it?" I asked. He glanced at the document but didn't read it. He knew what it was. "I wrote it," he said, his voice gaining a bit of strength, slipping back into a professional cadence that must have been muscle memory. "I drafted every clause, ironclad. That was what Walter wanted. Ironclad discretion." "Who is Walter?" I asked. "Walter Keene," he said. He said the name with a mixture of reverence and fear. The Keene dynasty, manufacturing, engines. Millions of dollars in 1992, billions now. I felt a chill. I knew the name. Keene Dynamics was a massive company. I had seen their logo on appliances, on industrial equipment. Why did Walter Keene care about me? I asked. Ames looked at me with pity. He cared about his reputation. "My dear, you were the mistake, the variable that needed to be solved." He leaned back, looking at the ceiling. "Your father was Luke Keene," he said, "Walter's youngest son. The black sheep. Luke was wild, reckless. He liked to play at being a common man. He spent a summer working in a diner in Harborview. That is where he met Rebecca. Rebecca Lane." I said, "My mother." Ames nodded. "She was 19. A waitress. Sweet girl, but troubled. No family, no money. When she got pregnant, Luke panicked. He went to Daddy, and Walter went to me. He looked at me sharply. They could not have a scandal. Not then. Walter was running for Senate. A bastard grandchild from a waitress. It would have destroyed the narrative. So, we made a deal." I pointed at the agreement. "You bought me. We secured your future," Ames corrected, his tone turning defensive. "Rebecca was not fit to raise you. She was a child herself. She had habits. We offered her a clean break, money to start over in California, and we promised her that her baby would be taken care of, that you would have a good life. So you gave me to Thomas and Elaine Price." I said, "Why them?" Ames shrugged. "They were convenient. They were clients of a small accounting firm I did business with. Good people, desperate for a child, unable to conceive, and most importantly, they were struggling. They needed financial help as much as they needed a baby. It was a symbiotic arrangement." He made it sound so clinical. Symbiotic, like bacteria. I leaned in closer. "My parents received payments for 32 years. The letter said, family support, but the document says trust." Ames's face darkened. A shadow passed over his eyes, and for a moment, He looked afraid. That was later. He muttered, "That was not the original plan." "What do you mean?" "The original trust was simple," Ames said. "A lump sum, invested conservatively, to pay out a stipend for your care and education until you turned 32. At 32, the remainder was supposed to vest to you. You were supposed to get the principal." My heart skipped a beat. Vest to me, I never knew about any principal. My parents lived paycheck to paycheck. Ames looked down at his hands. He began to pick at a loose thread on his blanket. "Things changed," he whispered. "Walter got sick, Alzheimer's, he lost control of the accounts, and Martin." Martin stepped in. "Who is Martin?" I asked. "Martin Keene," he said, "Walter's nephew. Luke's cousin. He was the shark in the tank. When he found out about the trust, when he found out about the secret payments, he didn't want to shut it down. He wanted to use it." Use it. How Ames looked up at me, his eyes wet. He came to me. He said the trust was too generous. He said nobody would miss a few percentage points here and there. He called them management fees, advisory retainers. I felt a sick realization dawning on me. "You stole it," I said. "You and Martin Keene. You drained the trust. We amended it," Ames snapped, his voice rising. "We had to." Martin threatened to expose everything. He threatened to tell the press about Luke and Rebecca. He threatened to have your adoption annulled. He told your parents that if they didn't sign the amendments, if they didn't agree to the lower payments and the diversion of funds, he would take you away. "My parents," I whispered. "They knew." "They were terrified," Ames said. "They were simple people, Eleanor. They were mechanics and housewives. They were up against the Keene family. Martin told them he had judges in his pocket. He told them he could prove the adoption was fraudulent because of the money exchange. He told them you would end up in foster care. So they signed," I said, feeling a wave of nausea. "They signed whatever Martin put in front of them," Ames said, "to keep you. They did it to keep you." He slumped back in his chair, exhausted by the confession. "And the money?" I asked. "Where did it go?" "Shell companies," Ames murmured. "Consulting firms, Maple Ridge Holdings, Harborview excessive yield funds. It went into Martin's pockets. And mine. I had debts. I had no choice." I stood up. I couldn't look at him anymore. This frail, old man had been the architect of my family's fear for 3 decades. "One last question," I said, my voice shaking. "The letter I got, the one saying the support is ending." "Why now?" Ames closed his eyes. "Because the 32 years are up," he whispered. "The contract is expired. The trust is closing. And Martin wants to make sure there are no loose ends. He wants the records sealed forever." He opened his eyes and looked at me one last time. "Be careful. Rebecca's girl. Martin Keene is not like Walter. Walter just wanted privacy. Martin wants power, and he does not like it when the past comes knocking." We walked out of the nursing home in silence. The sun was shining now, bright and mocking. I felt dirty. I felt like I needed to scrub my skin with steel wool. Daniel drove us home. I stared out the window, watching the miles blur by. Luke Keene, Walter Keene, Martin Keene. I was not just Eleanor Price. I was a Keene. I was the granddaughter of an industrial tycoon, and I was the victim of a 30-year embezzlement scheme orchestrated by my own cousin. When we got back to the house, the empty silence greeted us. Mrs. Higgins brought Lily back an hour later, and I hugged my daughter so hard she squeaked. "Mummy, you are squishing me," she giggled. I let her go, but I couldn't stop looking at her. She had my eyes. Did she have Luke Keene's nose? Did she have Rebecca Lane's smile that night, after Lily was asleep? I turned the kitchen table into a war room. I brought up the bank ledgers. Mr. Henderson had given us the record of what my parents actually received, and I laid them next to the letters from Harborview Trust Services that I had found in the lockbox. Most of the Harborview letters were just notifications of transfer, but a few of them, the ones from the early years, had detailed statements attached. I pulled out a calculator. According to the trust statement from 1995, the monthly allocation for beneficiary support was $4,000. I looked at my parents' bank ledger for 1995. Deposit family support, $700, $3,300 missing. Every month, I check 2005. Trust statement allocation, $6,500. Bank ledger. Deposit, $1,000. I ran the numbers. Over 32 years. The discrepancy was not just thousands, it was millions. The trust must have been endowed with a massive principal to generate that kind of interest and payout. And my parents had received pennies on the dollar. I looked closer at the bank records. Mr. Henderson had mentioned a pass-through. I traced the incoming deposits. They didn't come directly from Harborview. They came from a sender labeled MR Holdings. I went to my laptop and searched for MR Holdings. Nothing. I searched for Maple Ridge Holdings. A business registration popped up. It was an active LLC. The registered address was a P.O. box in a strip mall in Fairview, the city where Keen Dynamics was headquartered. I paid $20 to download the articles of incorporation. The manager was listed as a corporate entity, but the registered agent, the person responsible for the paperwork, was listed, Clifford Ames. And there, in the fine print of the annual report filed 3 years ago, was a list of member interests, M. Keen. It was exactly as Ames had said. They had set up a company to intercept the trust funds, skim off 80%, and pass the crumbs to my parents. But my parents had accepted the crumbs. Why I thought about what Ames said. They were terrified. Martin told them he could prove the adoption was fraudulent. I needed to understand the pressure they were under. I needed to know if they had fought back, or if they had just rolled over. I called Jonah again. It was late, almost 11 o'clock. He picked up on the first ring. I am not changing my mind. Eleanor, he said immediately, you should leave it alone. I went to see Ames. Jonah, I said. Silence, then a sharp intake of breath. You did what I saw him. He told me everything. He told me about the Keens. He told me about the money. I heard Jonah sigh. The Keens. Who are the Keens? They are the family. Jonah, my biological family. They are billionaires, and they set up a trust for me that was supposed to make me wealthy, but Ames and a man named Martin Keen stole it. Jonah was silent for a long time. They stole it, he asked finally. Yes, millions. Jonah, and Mom and Dad. They signed the papers allowing it to happen. They didn't have a choice, Jonah snapped. How do you know that I asked? My voice rising. You told me you didn't know the details, but you are defending them like you were in the room. What do you know? Jonah. I heard him pacing on the other end of the line. I told you I heard them arguing. He said, you heard more than that. I said, tell me. Jonah hesitated. Do you remember 2004? He asked quietly. I thought back. I was 12. That was the year Dad hurt his back. The year the shop was closed for 2 months. Yeah, I said. It was a bad year. It was worse than bad, Jonah said. The bank was going to foreclose on the house, Ellie, and the shop. Dad was 3 months behind on the mortgage. He was going to lose everything. I didn't know that. I whispered, Of course you didn't. They protected you. But I was 18. I saw the foreclosure notices. So what happened? One night. A man came to the house. Jonah said, I didn't know who he was then. Fancy suit? Expensive car? He sat in the kitchen with Mom and Dad for 3 hours. I was listening from the top of the stairs. Martin Keen. I said, probably. Jonah said, he was smooth. He told Dad that he could help. He said there was flexibility in the trust. He said he could release a lump sum to pay off the shop's debts and cover the mortgage. That sounds generous. I said, it wasn't. Jonah said bitterly. There was a catch. The man said, I can give you this $50,000 now to save your house, but you have to sign this addendum. It restructures the future payments. He paused. Dad asked what it meant. The man said, it means the monthly payments go down, and the principal, the big money at the end, that goes away. It comes back to the family foundation. He stole my inheritance to pay off his mortgage, I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. He saved our home. Jonah yelled, he saved the roof over your head. Eleanor. The man told him, you can take this deal and save your business, Or you can refuse, and I will stop the payments entirely and tie you up in court until you starve." Jonah's voice broke. Dad was crying. Ellie. I had never heard him cry before. He looked at Mom and said, "If I sign this, I am stealing from her. I am stealing her future." And Mom held his hand and said, "If we lose the house, she has no present. We have to survive today. Tom." I sat there, gripping the phone. I could picture it. My proud, stubborn father, broken by debt and threatened by a predator in a suit. "So they signed," I said softly. "They signed," Jonah said, "and they hated themselves for it every day after. That is why Dad was so angry about the cabinet. That is why he never wanted you to look. It wasn't just the secret of your birth, Ellie. It was the evidence of his failure. He felt like he had failed you." I closed my eyes. I felt a tearing sensation in my chest. Two emotions were warring for dominance. One was anger, pure, hot anger. My parents had used my money that could have paid for college, for a house, for Lily's future to fix their own mistakes. They had bargained away my birthright to keep their small life afloat. But the other emotion was a crushing, complicated love. They had been cornered. They had been threatened by a powerful man who viewed them as insects. They had sacrificed my abstract future wealth to ensure I had a bed to sleep in that night. They were not villains, but they were not heroes either. They were just people. Flawed, frightened people who had made a deal with the devil. Eleanor, Jonah asked, "Are you still there?" "I am here," I said. "So now you know," he said. "They didn't steal from you out of greed. They did it to survive. Please, Ellie, let it go. You can't fight billionaires. You will lose, and you will drag Mom and Dad's name through the mud in the process." I looked at the paperwork on the table. I looked at the name Martin Keene on the Shell Company report. He had come into my parents' kitchen and bullied them. He had used their poverty as a weapon. He had turned my inheritance into his own private slush fund, and he thought he had gotten away with it because my parents were dead and the 32 years were up. He thought I was just a nurse in a small town. He thought I was nobody. I'm not going to drag their name through the mud. "Jonah," I said, my voice hardening. "Good." Jonah exhaled. "Thank you. I am going to clear it," I said. "What I'm going to prove that they were coerced." I said, "I am going to prove that Martin Keene committed fraud, and I am going to get back what he took, not just for me, for them." "Eleanor." "You are crazy," Jonah said. "Maybe," I said, "but I have the documents. I have the tape, and now I have a witness." Ames, Jonah scoffed. "He is senile. He is lucid enough," I said, "and I think he is scared enough of the afterlife to want to clear his conscience." I hung up before Jonah could argue further. I sat alone in the kitchen. The anger was settling into something colder, something sharper. It was resolve. I looked at the computer screen. I typed in Keene Dynamics. I found the corporate leadership page. There he was, Martin Keene, Chief Financial Officer. He was a handsome man in his 50s, with silver hair and a practiced smile. He looked like a man who had never worried about a mortgage payment in his life. He looked untouchable. I reached for the stack of Harborview letters. I found the most recent one, the one that said immediate action required. I pulled a fresh sheet of paper from the printer. I was not going to write to Martin. Not yet. I was going to find the person who mattered, the person Ames had mentioned, the person who had the power. "Walter Keene is dead," Ames had said. But Walter had other children. Luke was dead, but there had to be someone else. I searched the family tree. Walter Keene had a daughter, Margaret Keene Holt, the current chairwoman of the board. I stared at her photo. She had a stern face, but her eyes looked familiar. They looked a little bit like mine. I picked up a pen. I was going to write a letter, and I was going to sign it with the name they thought was buried 32 years ago. Baby Lane. The internet is a cruel window. It allows you to see exactly how small your life is compared to the giants who walk the same earth. For 3 nights, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the glowing blue portal of my laptop screen, scrolling through the digital empire of Keene Dynamics. They were not just a company, They were an institution, headquartered in Fairview, a city 2 hours east of Maple Ridge. They manufactured everything from turbine engines to medical centrifuges. Their logo, a stylized silver hawk wing, was plastered on philanthropic galas, university wings, and hospital pavilions. And there, smiling from the board of directors page, was the family. Margaret Keene Holt, chairwoman. She looked to be in her late 50s, with steel-gray hair cut in a sharp bob and eyes that held a formidable intelligence. Martin Keene, chief financial officer, the man Jonah said had sat in our kitchen and threatened my father. He looked polished, his smile practiced and easy, the kind of man who could foreclose on a home while shaking your hand. I felt like an ant contemplating a climb up a skyscraper. I had scanned the documents from the lockbox, the private support agreement, the letters from Harborview, the hospital bracelet. They sat in a PDF file on my desktop named evidence.pdf. I opened a new email draft. My cursor hovered over the To field. I had found the email address for the General Counsel of Keene Dynamics. It was a generic corporate contact, likely screened by 3 layers of assistance. I typed the subject line, Inquiry regarding Harborview Trust and Beneficiary A. Lane. I stared at the screen. I felt ridiculous. I felt like one of those spam bots asking for bank details. Who would believe me? A nurse from a nowhere town claiming to be the secret granddaughter of Walter Keene. They would think I was a lunatic or a grifter. But then I looked at the bank ledger Mr. Henderson had given me. I looked at the line where my parents' mortgage nearly defaulted in 2004. I thought of my father's shame. I thought of Martin Keene's suit. I attached the file. I wrote a brief message. To the Office of the General Counsel. My name is Eleanor Price. I recently discovered the attached documents in the estate of my late parents, Thomas and Elaine Price. They concern a trust established in 1992 regarding an infant referred to as Baby Lane. The documents bear the signature of Clifford Ames and reference the Keene family. I am not asking for money. I am asking if these documents are real. If they are, I believe I am the person listed as the beneficiary. Please contact me, Eleanor Price. I hit send before I could talk myself out of it. The silence that followed lasted for 3 days. I went back to work at the hospital. I changed bandages, administered IVs, and held the hands of patients coming out of surgery. I tried to be the Eleanor Price I had always been, but I felt like I was wearing a costume. Every time my phone buzzed in my pocket, my heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. On the 4th day, I was in the break room, stirring powdered creamer into lukewarm coffee, when my phone rang. The number was unlisted. I answered it. Hello? Is this Eleanor Price? The voice was female, low, and cultured. It sounded accustomed to being listened to. Yes. This is she. This is Margaret Keene Holt. I nearly dropped my coffee. The chairwoman. She had not delegated this to a lawyer. She had called herself Mrs. Keene Holt. I stammered. I didn't expect you to call. There was a pause on the line. It was heavy, filled with a tension that traveled across the miles. I reviewed the documents you sent. Eleanor, she said. Her voice was steady, but there was a tremor in it, a hairline fracture in the composure. If you are who I think you are, I have wanted to meet you for 32 years. I gripped the edge of the counter. You knew about me. We knew there was a baby, she said. We knew Luke had a daughter, but we were told, well, that is a conversation for in person. She cleared her throat. I would like to meet you, today, if possible. There is a hotel in Oakbridge, the Grand Hyatt. It is halfway between Fairview and Maple Ridge. Can you meet me in the lounge at 4 o'clock? I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 1 o'clock. Yes, I said, I can be there. I left work early, claiming a family emergency. In a way, it was the truest thing I had ever said. I drove to Oakbridge in a daze. The Grand Hyatt was a glass tower that looked out over the river. The lounge was quiet, carpeted in deep plush wool, smelling of expensive coffee and old leather. I saw her immediately. She was sitting in a high-backed wing chair in the corner, away from the windows. She was wearing a navy blazer and a silk scarf. She looked exactly like her photo, but tired. The lines around her mouth were deep. She stood up as I approached. She was tall, Eleanor, she asked. Yes. She stared at me. She didn't shake my hand. She just looked, her eyes searching every inch of my face. It was an intense, hungry scrutiny that made me want to shrink away, but I held my ground. My God, she whispered, you have Luke's forehead, and his height. She gestured for me to sit. I sat down. My hands were shaking, so I clasped them in my lap. Mrs. Keenholt. Please, call me Margaret, she said. She sat down opposite me. She signaled a waiter and ordered a pot of tea, then turned back to me. I need you to understand something. Eleanor, she said, we did not abandon you. I reached into my bag and pulled out the physical copies of the agreement. The paper says my parents were paid to keep me a secret. I said, my voice sharper than I intended. It says I was a transaction. Margaret looked at the papers with disdain. Clifford Ames drafted that. She said, it was his language. My father was a difficult man. He was obsessed with the family image. When Luke got Rebecca pregnant, Dad panicked. He wanted the problem solved. So he bought me off. I said, he wanted to ensure you were safe. Margaret insisted. The trust was not hush money. Eleanor, it was an endowment. It was meant to be a safety net. She leaned forward. The plan that Luke and I agreed to was that your adoptive parents would raise you away from the spotlight. But when you turned 18, the trust was supposed to unlock. You were supposed to be given a letter from Luke. You were supposed to have the choice to come to us. I stared at her. 18, I asked. I am 33. I never got a letter. I never got a choice. I know, Margaret said softly, because 15 years ago, Clifford Ames told us you were gone. Gone. He told us the prices had moved. She said, he said they had stopped cashing the support checks. He said he tracked them down, and they told him they wanted nothing to do with the Keene family. That you were happy, that you didn't know you were adopted, and that any contact from us would be intrusive and unwelcome. I felt the blood drain from my face. That is a lie. I said, we never moved. We lived in the same house in Maple Ridge my entire life, and the checks, they didn't stop. Margaret frowned. What do you mean? I pulled out the bank ledgers. I slid them across the table. My parents received payments every month for 32 years. I said, they never stopped cashing them, but the amounts, they were small. $500, $1,000. Margaret put on a pair of reading glasses. She ran her finger down the column of numbers. Her frown deepened. This is impossible, she murmured. The trust allocation was over $5,000 a month in the 90s. It should be nearly $12,000 a month now. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with shock. Where is the rest of it? She asked. I think you should ask your cousin Martin. I said. Margaret recoiled. Why Martin? Because the money didn't come from Harborview. I said, it came from a shell company called Maple Ridge Holdings. I looked it up. Martin Keene is listed on the annual report. Margaret went very still. She took off her glasses and placed them on the table with a slow, deliberate movement. Martin has been managing the family trusts since Dad got sick, she said quietly. He told us the Harborview Trust was dormant. He said the funds were sitting there, accumulating interest, waiting in case you ever surfaced. She looked at the ledger again. He has been skimming it. She whispered, for 30 years. He didn't just skim it. Margaret, I said, he came to my house. I told her about what Jonah had said, about the visit in 2004, about the threat to foreclose on my parents' home, about the coercion. Margaret listened, her face growing paler by the second. When I finished, she closed her eyes and pressed her fingers to her temples. I am so sorry, she said. Her voice was thick with emotion. I had no idea. I truly had no idea. Martin always said he was handling the delicate matters. We let him do it because it was easier than facing the past. She reached down to a leather tote bag by her feet. I brought you something, she said. She placed a small wooden box on the table. It was made of cedar, polished and old. Ames told us you were gone, she said. But I kept this, just in case. She pushed the box toward me. It belonged to Rebecca. She said. I looked at the box. My heart was in my throat. Open it, Margaret said gently. I lifted the lid. Inside, there was a stack of envelopes tied with a blue ribbon, and a few loose photographs. I picked up the photos first. The first one showed a young man with shaggy dark hair and a wide, reckless grin. He was wearing a denim jacket and had his arm around a girl. The girl was beautiful. She had long, wavy hair and eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled. She looked happy, but there was a fragility to her, a thinness in her face. That is Luke, Margaret said softly, and Rebecca. They were so young. I stared at the woman, my mother. I touched her face in the photo. I had her chin. I had her nose. What happened to her, I asked. Ames said she was troubled. Margaret sighed. Rebecca had a hard life. Eleanor, she came from nothing. She struggled with addiction. Painkillers, mostly. After you were born, giving you up broke something in her. She tried to get clean. She tried so hard. She pointed to the letters. She wrote these to you. Margaret said, over the years, she would send them to me, asking me to keep them for the day you came back. I untied the ribbon. My fingers were clumsy. I pulled out the top letter. The handwriting was jagged, frantic in places. My dearest baby girl, today is your 5th birthday. I wonder if you are having cake. I hope it is chocolate. I remember holding you in the hospital. You were so heavy, so solid. I sang You Are My Sunshine to you because it was raining outside. I hope your mommy sings to you. I hope she loves you as much as I do, even from far away. Please forgive me for not being strong enough to keep you. I wanted you to have a house with a yard and a father who wasn't afraid. I wanted you to be safe. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. I wiped it away, but another followed. She died 10 years ago. Margaret said softly. An overdose. It was accidental. We think her heart just gave out. I looked at the date on the last letter. It was dated a month before she died. I am tired, little one, but I dream of you. I dream you are tall and smart and kind. I dream you are happy. That is all I ever wanted. I put the letter down and covered my face with my hands. I wept. I wept for the mother I never knew, for the woman who had loved me from the darkness of her own pain. I wept for the years that had been stolen. Margaret reached across the table and touched my arm. Her hand was warm. She loved you. Eleanor, she said, we all did, in our own dysfunctional way. I sat there for a long time, letting the grief wash over me. The hotel lounge bustled around us businessmen making deals, waiters clinking glass, but at that table, it was just me and the ghosts of my family. When I finally composed myself, I wiped my face with a napkin. Thank you for this, I said, touching the box. Margaret looked at me, her expression hardening again. She looked at the bank ledger on the table. You said you are a nurse, she asked. Yes, and your parents. They struggled. They worked hard. I said, but yes, we never had much. My husband, Daniel, he just lost his job last week. We are worried about the mortgage. I admitted it with a flush of shame. I hated that money was part of this conversation. It felt sordid to talk about bills while holding my dead mother's letters. Margaret's eyes flashed with anger, not at me, but at the situation. This is unacceptable, she said. Martin has been living in a mansion on the lake. He has bought 3 vacation homes in the last decade, and you, the beneficiary, you are worried about a mortgage. She picked up the ledger and the copy of the agreement. May I keep these copies, she asked. Yes, I am going to launch an internal audit, Margaret said. Tomorrow morning, if Martin has done what I think he has done, he will answer for it. She stood up. She looked at me, and for the first time, she smiled. It was a sad smile, but genuine. I know this is overwhelming, Eleanor, and I know we cannot make up for 32 years in one afternoon, but I would like to know you, not as a secret, as my niece. I stood up too. I'm not sure what I want yet. Margaret, this is a lot. Take your time, she said, but please, keep the box. It belongs to you. I drove back to Maple Ridge with the cedar box on the passenger seat. When I got home, the house was quiet. Lily was asleep. Daniel was sitting at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. He had a stack of bills in front of him. He looked up when I walked in. His face was drawn, tired. "How did it go?" he asked. I sat down and put the box on the table. I told him everything. I told him about Margaret, about Rebecca, about the lies Ames had told. Daniel listened, shaking his head in disbelief. "So they didn't know?" he asked. "The Keens didn't know we were here, no?" I said, "Ames and Martin kept us apart so they could keep stealing the money." Daniel looked at the bills on the table. The severance package from his tech job was only for 2 months. After that, we would be burning through our meager savings. "Eleanor," he said carefully, "if this trust, if it was supposed to vest to you, that is millions of dollars. It is legally yours." "I know." I said, "We could pay off the house," he said. "We could secure Lily's college. We could breathe." I looked at him. I saw the desperation in his eyes. He was a good man, a provider, and being unemployed was eating him alive. "I hate this," I said vehemently. "I hate that I'm thinking about the money. It feels like I'm trading my parents' dignity for a payout." "It is not a trade," Daniel said. "It is restitution. They stole from you. Eleanor, they stole from Tom and Elaine. Getting it back doesn't make you greedy. It makes you right." But Jonah didn't see it that way. He came over the next evening. I showed him the box of letters. I told him about the meeting with Margaret. "So you met with them," he said, pacing the living room floor. "You actually went and met the billionaires." "She is my aunt, Jonah." I said. "She is a stranger," he shouted. "These people, they chew people up. Eleanor, look at what they did to Mom and Dad. Martin did that." I argued. "Margaret didn't know." "Oh, please," Jonah scoffed. "She is the chairwoman. Of course she knew. They are all in on it. They are just trying to cover their tracks now because you showed up with evidence." He stopped pacing and pointed a finger at me. "If you pursue this, if you let them audit the books, it is all going to come out. The whole town is going to know that Thomas Price took hush money. They are going to know that he signed away his daughter's rights to save his auto shop. He didn't sign away my rights," I yelled. "He was coerced." "It won't look like that in the papers," Jonah yelled back. "It will look like he sold you. Do you want that to be his legacy? Do you want people whispering that Tom and Elaine were child traffickers?" I recoiled. "That is not fair. It is the truth," Jonah said. "People are mean. Ellie, they love a scandal. You are going to turn our parents into villains just so you can cash a check from the Keene family." "I am not doing it for the check," I cried. "I am doing it for the truth." "Then why did you bring up Daniel's job?" Jonah asked, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Why did you tell me that Daniel losing his job makes this urgent?" I froze. "Admit it," Jonah said. "You need the money, and you are willing to torch Mom and Dad's memory to get it. Get out," I whispered. Jonah stared at me. He looked disappointed. He looked like he didn't know me anymore. "Fine," he said. "I will go. But if you drag this family through the mud, Eleanor, don't expect me to stand there with you." He slammed the front door behind him. I stood in the silence of the living room. I looked at the cedar box on the coffee table. I looked at the stack of bills on the kitchen counter. I felt pulled in 2 directions, ripped down the middle. On one side was the safety of the past, the quiet, noble lie of the Price family. On the other side was the dangerous, complicated truth of the Keenes. And standing in the middle, holding a box of letters from a dead mother and a bank ledger full of stolen numbers, was me. I picked up one of the photos from the box. Rebecca Lane, smiling her fragile smile. "I wanted you to have a house with a yard and a father who wasn't afraid." My father, Thomas Price, had been afraid. Martin Keene had made him afraid. I felt a surge of cold fury. Jonah was wrong. Protecting Martin Keene's secret was not honoring my parents. It was letting their abuser win. I picked up my phone. I had Margaret's personal number. I typed a message. "Margaret, I want to proceed. I want to see the records. All of them." I pressed send. There was no going back now. The locked cabinet was empty. The box was open. And I was going to finish what was started 32 years ago. The world of high-stakes litigation is a foreign country to a nurse, in my world. Emergencies are physical: a stopping heart, a severed artery, a spiking fever. They are immediate and visceral. In the world of trusts and estates, emergencies are made of paper. They are silent, slow-moving glaciers of documents that can crush you without making a sound. I knew I could not navigate this alone. Margaret Keene Holt was my aunt, and she seemed sincere in her desire to help, but she was also the chairwoman of the company that had effectively swallowed my inheritance. Relying solely on her internal audit felt like asking the fox to double-check the henhouse inventory. I needed a wolf of my own. I found Claire Dawson through a recommendation from a doctor at the hospital. Her office was not in a glass tower like the Keenes. It was in a converted brick row house in downtown Maple Ridge, above a bakery. The air in the stairwell smelled of yeast and old carpet. Claire was a woman in her 40s with sharp, intelligent eyes and hair pulled back in a severe bun that seemed to pull her face into a permanent expression of skepticism. She listened to my story without interrupting, her pen scratching furiously across a yellow legal pad. When I finished, I placed the private support agreement and the bank ledgers on her desk. She picked them up, adjusting her glasses. "This is a mess." "Eleanor," she said, her voice dry and precise. "A magnificent, terrifying mess. Can you help me?" I asked. Claire looked at the signature on the agreement. "Clifford Ames." She let out a short, humorless laugh. "I know of Ames," she said. "He was a shark in the 80s, the kind of lawyer who would foreclose on an orphanage on Christmas Eve if the paperwork was in order. If he drafted this, he left loopholes, but he also left traps." She looked up at me. "If we do this, we go hard. We file motions to freeze the remaining assets in the Harborview Trust immediately. We subpoena the records from Maple Ridge Holdings. We demand a full accounting from Keene Dynamics regarding any commingled funds." She leaned forward. "It will be an act of war. Eleanor, they will not like it. Do it," I said. 2 days after Claire filed the motions, the war came to my doorstep. It was a Tuesday morning. I had taken the day off to sort through more boxes in the garage. Daniel was out at a job interview, and Lily was at preschool. I was wearing old sweatpants and one of my father's flannel shirts, my hair tied up in a messy knot. The doorbell rang. I expected a package delivery. When I opened the door, I froze. Martin Keene was standing on my porch. He looked exactly like his photo, only more imposing in 3 dimensions. He was wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my car. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, and he smelled of expensive cologne and mints. There was a black sedan idling in my driveway, a driver waiting behind the wheel. "Eleanor," he said. His voice was warm, rich, and utterly terrifying. "Mr. Keene," I said, gripping the doorframe. "Please, call me Martin. We are family, after all." He smiled. It was a dazzling smile, the kind that wins elections and board votes. "I have a lawyer." I said, "You should be talking to her." Martin waved a hand dismissively, as if swatting away a fly. "Lawyers are for enemies. Eleanor, I am not your enemy. May I come in? Just for a moment. I wanted to pay my respects regarding your parents." I hesitated. My instinct was to slam the door, but a deeper, colder curiosity took hold. I wanted to see him up close. I wanted to look into the eyes of the man who had threatened my father in his own kitchen. I stepped back. "Come in." He stepped into the hallway, looking around with polite interest. He noted the scuff marks on the floor, the pile of mail on the side table, the family photos on the wall. He looked like a king visiting a peasant's hovel, trying to appear charmed by the rusticity. "Nice home," he said. "Cozy. Thomas kept it up well." He walked into the living room and stood by the fireplace. I followed him, my heart pounding in my throat. As I walked past the coffee table, I slipped my hand into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I pressed the side button to wake it, tapped the voice memo app, and hit record. I slid it face down onto the table, half hidden by a stack of magazines. "What do you want?" Martin, I asked, crossing my arms. Martin turned to face me. He sighed. A sound of heavy burdens. I want to resolve this. Eleanor, quietly, for everyone's sake, he gestured to the sofa. Please, sit. I remained standing. I am fine. Martin nodded and remained standing as well. I saw the motions your lawyer filed, he said. Aggressive. Very aggressive. Margaret is upset. She feels you have declared war on the family that tried to protect you. Protect me? I laughed. A harsh, jagged sound. You mean the family that paid to erase me? We paid to give you a life, Martin said smoothly. Rebecca, your mother? She was a lovely girl, but she was a train wreck. Eleanor, I remember the day you were born, October 14th. It was raining sheets. I drove Ames to the hospital myself. I remember seeing Rebecca in that bed, high as a kite, crying because she knew she couldn't keep you. He said her name with such casual familiarity, Rebecca, as if he were talking about a pet that had to be put down. We did what was best, he continued. We found Thomas and Elaine. We set up the trust. We handled the mess so you could grow up here, safe and sound, playing in the leaves in Maple Ridge. And then you stole the money meant to support me. I said. Martin's expression didn't change. He looked disappointed, like a teacher with a slow student. Stole is such an ugly word. Eleanor, we managed it. Markets fluctuate. Investments fail. The trust was complex. He took a step closer. Look, I am here to make you an offer. I know you and your husband are going through a rough patch. Unemployment is stressful. My blood ran cold. How did he know about Daniel? We can end this today, Martin said. I am authorized to offer you a settlement. $1 million, tax-free, wired to your account tomorrow. $1 million. It was more money than I had ever seen. It would pay off the house, the debts, everything. And in exchange you drop the lawsuit, Martin said. You sign a non-disclosure agreement, and you agree that the records the adoption papers. The trust documents remain sealed, permanently. And what about the truth, I asked? What about admitting what you did to my parents? Martin's eyes hardened. The warmth evaporated, leaving something flat and reptilian behind. The truth is a commodity, Eleanor, he said softly. And right now, the truth is that you are a nurse with a mortgage and a 4-year-old daughter. He looked at a photo of Lily on the mantel. She is a beautiful child. He said, Lily, right. It would be a shame for her to grow up in the middle of a media circus. Reporters camping on your lawn, cameras in her face at preschool, people digging into your husband's employment history. It gets very ugly. Eleanor, very fast. I felt a surge of nausea. It was a threat, veiled in concern, wrapped in a velvet glove, but a threat nonetheless. Are you threatening my daughter? I asked, my voice shaking. Martin looked shocked. Heavens no. I am protecting her. I am telling you that if you pursue this, if you drag the Keene name into court, we will fight back, and we have resources you cannot imagine. We will paint your parents as opportunists who sold a baby. We will paint you as a gold digger. We will make your life a glass house, and we will throw stones until it shatters. He buttoned his jacket. Take the $1 million. Eleanor, be smart. Be the good mother I know you are. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. He placed it on the coffee table, right next to my recording phone. Call me by 5 o'clock, or the offer expires. He walked out. I stood there, trembling, until I heard the heavy thud of his car door and the purr of the engine fading away. I snatched up my phone and stopped the recording. My hands were shaking so hard, I almost dropped it. I played it back. It would be a shame for her to grow up in the middle of a media circus. His voice was clear. Every dripping syllable of coercion was captured. I called Claire immediately. I sent her the file. 10 minutes later, she called me back. You got him, she said. Her voice was fierce. That is coercion. That is intimidation of a witness. That is leverage. Eleanor, we are not taking the settlement. Are we? I asked. Claire laughed. A sharp, dangerous sound. Take it, Eleanor. We are going to use it to bury him. 2 days later, we met for mediation. It was held in a neutral conference room in an office building in Fairview. The table was long and polished to a mirror shine. On one side sat Martin Keene and a team of 3 lawyers in identical blue suits. On the other side sat me, Daniel, Jonah, and Claire. Jonah looked ill. He was pale and kept wringing his hands. He didn't want to be there. He was terrified that we were about to destroy our parents' reputation. Margaret Keene Holt was there too, sitting at the head of the table. She looked grim. She had initiated the internal audit, and the results were sitting in a thick binder in front of her. Claire started the meeting. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. She played the recording of Martin in my living room. The silence in the room as Martin's voice threatened my daughter was absolute. Martin sat stone-faced, staring at a spot on the wall. His lawyers looked uncomfortable. Margaret looked furious. She turned to Martin, her eyes blazing. "You went to her house," she whispered. "After I told you to stay away, I was trying to protect the firm." "Margaret," Martin said stiffly. "You were protecting yourself," she snapped. Claire opened a folder. "We have subpoenaed the records from Maple Ridge Holdings," she said, "and thanks to Mrs. Keene Holt's cooperation, we have cross-referenced them with the trust disbursements." She slid a spreadsheet across the table. "Here is the smoking gun," she said. I looked at the spreadsheet. It was a timeline of transactions. Claire pointed to a cluster of entries in the year 2004. In May of 2004, the Price Auto Shop was facing bankruptcy. She said, there were tax liens and a foreclosure notice on the family home. I looked at Jonah. He was staring at the table, tears in his eyes. On June 1st, 2004, Claire continued, a lump sum of $50,000 was transferred from the Harborview Trust to Thomas Price's business account. That is the money that saved the shop, Jonah whispered. Yes, Claire said. But look at the next entry. On the same day, a document was signed. An amendment to the trust. It reclassified the monthly payments. Instead of beneficiary support, they became consulting fees, and the amount was permanently capped at $1,000 a month. The remaining interest, roughly $8,000 a month, was diverted to a new entity. K. Advisory Services. Claire looked at Martin. You bought them off, she said. You found them at their weakest moment. You offered them a lifeline $50,000 to save their home, and in exchange, you forced them to sign away Eleanor's future. You turned the trust into your personal piggy bank. Martin scoffed. They signed it willingly. Thomas Price thanked me. He shook my hand. Because you held a gun to his head, I shouted. Not a literal gun, but a financial one. You knew they would do anything to keep a roof over my head. Martin shrugged. It was business. They needed capital. I provided it. The terms were agreed upon. Margaret slammed her hand down on the table. It was fraud. Martin, she yelled. You defrauded the beneficiary. You defrauded the board. You defrauded me. She pushed the binder toward him. I have seen the accounts. Martin, you bought a boat. You renovated your villa in Tuscany. You paid for your son's legal trouble in Vegas. All with money that was supposed to care for Luke's daughter. Martin's composure finally cracked. His face turned a blotchy red. Luke is dead, he spat. And he pointed at me. She is nobody. She is a mistake. Why should millions of dollars sit in an account for a mechanic's daughter while the family business, the business I run, needs liquidity? I use that money to grease wheels. Margaret, to make deals. I did it for the company, and for yourself, Claire added quietly. The room descended into shouting. Martin's lawyers were trying to intervene. Margaret was yelling, and Martin was shouting about ingratitude. But I was looking at the spreadsheet. $50,000. My parents had taken $50,000 of my money. I felt a sick, sinking sensation. Jonah was right. They were complicit. They had signed the paper. They had traded my millions for $50,000 and a lower monthly payment. They had sold me out. I felt a hand on my arm. It was Jonah. Look at the rest. Ellie, he whispered. I looked back at the paper, below the main transaction list. Claire had highlighted another set of data. What is this? I asked. Claire looked at me. Her expression softened. During the discovery, we found an account at the Maple Ridge Credit Union. She said, it was in your mother's name. Elaine Price. I didn't know she had a separate account. She opened it in July of 2004. Claire said, 1 month after they signed the deal with Martin, I looked at the deposits. August 2004, $20. September 2004, $35. October 2004, $50. Every month, for 18 years. Small amounts, cash deposits. The kind of money you save from clipping coupons, or skipping a haircut, or selling old clothes. The total balance in the account was $12,430, and the account nickname, for E. Claire slid a photocopy of a deposit slip across the table, in my mother's handwriting, on the memo line. She had written repayment. I stared at the word. Repayment. She knew. I whispered. She knew it was wrong. Claire said gently, she couldn't stop your father from signing the deal to save the house. She couldn't stand up to Martin, but she spent the rest of her life trying to pay it back, dollar by dollar. I felt the tears come then, hot and fast. I imagined my mother, walking to the credit union in the rain, depositing $20 she had scraped together from the grocery budget. I imagined the guilt she must have carried every day, the weight of that secret. She wasn't a villain. She was a woman trapped in a vice, trying to claw back a sliver of integrity. Jonah was crying openly now. She never spent a dime of it. He choked out, we were broke so many times. The water heater broke. The car died. She could have used that $12,000, but she never touched it because it wasn't hers. I said, she was keeping it for me. The mediation ended in a stalemate. Martin refused to resign. Margaret threatened to go to the district attorney. We left with nothing resolved, but everything changed. We drove back to Maple Ridge in silence. Jonah sat in the back seat, staring out the window. When we pulled into the driveway, Jonah didn't get out of the car immediately. He sat there, frowning. What is it? I asked, turning around. Jonah looked at me. His eyes were wide, focused on something far away. Repayment. He murmured, what? The deposit slip, he said. She wrote repayment. Yeah. Jonah rubbed his face. Do you remember? It must have been 6 months ago, right before the accident. I came over to help Dad move some boxes in the garage. I nodded. Mom wasn't in the kitchen. Jonah said, I went downstairs to look for her. The basement door was open. He looked at me, his expression intensifying. I heard her talking. Ellie. She was standing by the workbench. I couldn't see her clearly. She was in the shadows, but she was talking, softly, like she was reading something. Who was she talking to? I asked. That is just it, Jonah said. Nobody was there. I thought she was praying. She did that sometimes. I heard her say, I am so sorry. And then she said, Martin made us do it. I felt a chill ripple down my spine. I didn't think much of it. Jonah said, I called out to her, and she jumped. She looked guilty. She shoved something into her apron pocket. What did she shove? I don't know. Something small, black. A phone? I asked. No, Jonah said. Mom still had that old flip phone. This was smaller. Rectangular. He looked at me, like a voice recorder. My mind raced back to the tape in the VCR, the one that cut off. It is not just support, it is static. They had tried to record a confession once before, on video, but that tape was damaged. What if she tried again? I whispered. Jonah grabbed my shoulder. The cabinet. Ellie. The locked one. We scrambled out of the car. We ran into the house, startling Daniel and Lily, who were building a block tower in the living room. Where are you going? Daniel called. The basement, I shouted. We clattered down the stairs. The air was cold. The cabinet stood there, open and empty. The lockbox sitting on the workbench where I had left it. I ran to the cabinet. I shone my phone's flashlight into the empty interior. Dust, wood, nothing. I felt around the shelves. Solid. It has to be here, Jonah said, pacing behind me. She was standing right here. I looked at the construction of the cabinet. My father had built it. It was sturdy, made of thick pine. I ran my hands along the back panel. The wood was rough. Then I felt it. On the bottom shelf. In the back corner. One of the floor planks of the cabinet was slightly uneven. It was raised maybe a millimeter higher than the others. I pressed on it. It had a little give. I grabbed a flathead screwdriver from the workbench. "Here, hold the light," I told Jonah. He aimed the beam. I wedged the screwdriver into the seam of the plank. I pushed. The wood groaned. "Come on," I grunted. With a sharp crack, the plank popped up. It was a false bottom. Beneath the plank, nestled in a bed of pink fiberglass insulation, were two things: a slim black digital voice recorder and a white envelope. I reached in and pulled them out. My hands were covered in dust. The envelope was sealed. On the front, in my mother's careful, looping script, were the words, "To Eleanor. When he can't protect you anymore, my father, she knew. She knew there would come a day when Thomas would be gone, and the protection he provided, the silence he enforced, would vanish." I looked at Jonah. He was holding his breath. I tore open the envelope. Inside were 3 sheets of lined notebook paper, covered in handwriting. I started to read. "My dearest Eleanor, if you are reading this, then the worst has happened, and we are gone. And if you have found this, it means you have opened the cabinet, and you know about the lie. I need you to know the truth about the money, not what the papers say, the real truth. On June 1st, 2004, Martin Keene came to our home. He told your father that if we did not sign the amendment, he would destroy us. He brought papers showing he could call our loans. He told us he would take the house. He told us he would make sure you ended up on the street. Your father wanted to fight him. He threw him out of the house the first time. But Martin came back. He came back with pictures of you at school. He said, 'Do you want her to be safe, Thomas, or do you want to be right?' We signed, Eleanor. We signed because we were weak and because we were scared. We took the $50,000 to pay the bank, and every day since. I have felt like a thief. I have kept a record, a real record." I flipped to the second page. It was a list: dates, amounts, conversations. March 12, 2008. Martin called, said the trust yield was high, but he was keeping the surplus. Told Tom to buy a new truck to keep quiet. Tom hung up on him. July 4th, 2012. Letter from Ames, threatening legal action if we contacted the girl's grandmother. We didn't even know the grandmother was alive. It was all there. A meticulous log of every threat, every stolen dollar, every interaction with Martin Keene and Clifford Ames for the last 20 years. And at the bottom of the last page, I have recorded this statement on the device included. I have read this letter aloud, and I have added details that I was too afraid to write down. Names of the shell companies Martin mentioned. Account numbers I saw in his paperwork. Take this to a lawyer you trust. Do not let them get away with it. You are a Keene by blood. Eleanor, but you are a Price by heart, and Prices fight for what is right. Love, Mom. I lowered the letter. I looked at the digital recorder in my hand. It was small, plastic, unassuming, but it was the bullet that would kill Martin Keene. He had threatened me with a settlement. He had threatened me with the media. He had thought he was dealing with a naive nurse and a dead couple who couldn't speak. He was wrong. Elaine Price was speaking from the grave. I looked at Jonah. He was weeping silently, leaning against the workbench. She protected us, he whispered. In the end, she protected us. I gripped the recorder tight. Come on, Jonah, I said. Where to Claire's? I said, we are going to end this. The audio file was only 12 minutes long, but it dismantled a 20-year lie in the time it took to drink a cup of coffee. We sat in Claire Dawson's office, me, Jonah, and Daniel huddled around her desk as the small black device played my mother's voice. It was raspy, breathless, the sound of a woman speaking in a basement while her husband slept upstairs. Terrified that the floorboards might creak, she listed dates. She listed account numbers. She described the way Martin Keene had smiled when he told them that bankruptcy was a choice, not a destiny. When the recording ended, the silence in the room was heavy. Claire stared at the device for a long moment, then looked up at us. Her face was grim, but there was a light in her eyes that I recognized. It was the look of a hunter who had just found the blood trail. This changes everything, Claire said quietly. Before, we had a contract dispute. We had a claim of coercion that was hard to prove. Now we have a confession from a co-conspirator naming the ringleader. She picked up the device with a gloved hand, treating it like the unexploded ordnance it was. I am going to file this into evidence tomorrow morning, she said. I am going to amend our complaint to include elder financial exploitation, wire fraud, and conspiracy, and I'm going to ask the judge to refer this to the district attorney. Martin will fight it, Jonah said nervously. He was still pale, his eyes red from crying. He will say Mom was lying. He will say she was crazy. Claire shook her head. Your mother was meticulous. Jonah, she references specific bank transfers on specific dates. We have the ledgers to back every single word she says. It is corroboration. It is the nail in the coffin. The legal machine moved with terrifying speed after that. The filing of the recording acted like a grenade thrown into the Keene legal camp. We heard rumors of shouting matches in the Keene Dynamics boardroom. Margaret Keene Holt reportedly threatened to resign if the board did not suspend Martin immediately. But Martin did not go quietly. He dug in. He filed motions to suppress the recording, claiming it was hearsay, claiming it was inadmissible. He tried to seal the court proceedings, arguing that the reputation of a public company was at stake. The judge, a stern woman named Justice Reynolds, set a hearing to decide the motion to unseal. It was the pivotal moment. If the records remained sealed, Martin could settle quietly and disappear into his millions. If they were unsealed, the world would know what he had done. The hearing was set for a Tuesday in late November. The sky was gray and heavy with impending snow. The courthouse in Fairview was a granite fortress, imposing and cold. I walked in flanked by Daniel and Jonah. Jonah looked like he was walking to his execution. But he was there. He had put on his only suit, a navy blue one he usually wore to weddings and funerals. The courtroom was packed. Reporters sat in the back rows, their pens poised. They smelled blood. The phrase Keene Family Trust Scandal had started to circulate in legal blogs. Martin sat at the defense table. He looked thinner than when I had seen him in my living room. His tan seemed to have grayed. He did not look at me. Margaret was there too, sitting in the front row of the gallery, behind Martin but separated by a distinct, deliberate gap. She gave me a small, tight nod as I walked past. Justice Reynolds called the court to order. The arguments were technical at first. Lawyers citing precedents, debating the expectation of privacy versus the public interest. Martin's lawyer, a man with a voice like oiled gravel, argued that unsealing the adoption records would cause irreparable harm to the privacy of the biological family and the adoptive family. He is trying to protect the Prices, the lawyer said, gesturing vaguely in my direction. He is trying to protect the memory of Thomas and Elaine Price from public scrutiny. I felt a surge of anger. He was using my parents' names as a shield for his client's crimes. Claire stood up. Your Honor, she said clearly, the best person to speak to the privacy interests of the Price family is the Price family. I call Eleanor Price to the stand. A ripple of murmurs went through the room. I stood up. My legs felt like lead. I walked to the witness stand, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. I sat down. I looked out at the sea of faces. I saw Daniel, his eyes locked on mine, steady and loving. I saw Jonah, chewing his lip. I saw Martin, finally looking at me with a gaze of cold, flat hatred. Mrs. Price, Claire asked, standing by the podium, do you object to the unsealing of these records? No, I said. Even though they reveal that your parents, Thomas and Elaine Price, accepted money from the Keene family, even though they reveal that they signed an agreement to keep your identity secret. I took a deep breath. I thought of my mother's letter, Price's fight for what is right. My parents were not perfect, I said, my voice trembling slightly before finding its strength. They were poor, they were frightened, and they were manipulated by powerful men who saw them as disposable. I looked directly at Martin. For 32 years, I lived in a house filled with secrets. I said, I lived with a locked cabinet in the basement that I was forbidden to touch. I thought it was just my father being eccentric. I know now that it was because he was ashamed. He was ashamed that he had been forced to trade his daughter's future to save her home. I turned to the judge. Martin Keene wants to keep these records sealed to protect himself. I said, he claims he is protecting my parents. But my parents left me a letter. They left me a recording. They wanted this told. They wanted the world to know that they were coerced. Hiding the truth does not honor them. Your Honor, it only helps the man who exploited them. The courtroom was silent. I could hear the scratching of the stenographer's machine. Justice Reynolds looked at me for a long time. She looked at the stack of evidence on her bench, the transcript of my mother's tape, the bank ledgers, the threatening letters from Clifford Ames. "Thank you. Mrs. Price," she said softly, "you may step down." I went back to my seat. Daniel squeezed my hands so hard, I thought he might break my fingers. Justice Reynolds adjusted her glasses. She looked down at Martin's table. "The purpose of a sealed record is to protect the vulnerable," she said, her voice ringing through the room. "It is not to provide a cloak for fraud. It is not to hide the systemic exploitation of a family by the fiduciaries entrusted to care for them." She picked up her gavel. "The evidence presented suggests a decades-long pattern of coercion and misappropriation of funds," she said. "The public interest in exposing such abuse of power far outweighs the privacy interests of the defendants. The motion to unseal is granted. All records regarding the Harborview Trust and the adoption of the plaintiff are hereby public record." She banged the gavel. It sounded like a gunshot. Pandemonium broke out. Reporters scrambled for the doors to file their stories. Martin's lawyer was on his feet, shouting about an appeal. Martin sat perfectly still, staring at the table, his empire crumbling around him in real time. We walked out of the courtroom into a wall of flashbulbs. I had expected some attention, but I was not prepared for the frenzy. Microphones were thrust in my face. Questions were shouted from all directions. "Mrs. Price, how much is the trust worth? Are you going to take the Keene name? What do you have to say to your cousin Martin?" One reporter, a young woman with a sharp voice, shouted over the din. "Eleanor, they are calling you the hidden Keene heiress. How does it feel to be worth millions, the hidden Keene heiress?" The label stuck to me instantly, heavy and uncomfortable. It reduced my entire life, my struggle, my parents' sacrifice, to a $sign and a famous last name. I lowered my head and pushed through the crowd, Daniel and Claire flanking me like bodyguards. We made it to a quiet corridor away from the main exit. I leaned against the wall, trying to catch my breath. "You did it," Jonah said, shaking his head in disbelief. "You actually did it. I didn't do it alone." I said, "Mom did it." Just then, the double doors at the end of the hall swung open. Martin Keene walked out. He was alone. His lawyers had stayed behind to argue with the clerk. He saw us. He stopped. For a second, I thought he would turn and walk away, but he didn't. He walked straight toward us. His stride was still arrogant, but his face was gray. He stopped 5 feet away. He looked at me, his eyes cold and hard. "I hope you are happy." "Eleanor," he said, "you have your victory. You have your pound of flesh. I wanted the truth." "Martin," I said. "The truth," he scoffed. "The truth is that you have just painted a target on your back. You think the money will make you happy. It will ruin you. The press will dig through your trash. Every second cousin will come out of the woodwork asking for a loan. You are a Keene now, whether you like it or not, and Keenes are never happy." He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "And don't think this is over. Appeals take years. I will tie this money up until your daughter is in college. You will bleed legal fees until you are back to clipping coupons like your mother." Before I could respond, a shadow moved between us. It was Jonah. My brother, who had been terrified of this man for 20 years, who had begged me to drop the case, stepped directly into Martin's path. Jonah was a mechanic. He had broad shoulders and hands stained permanently with grease. He towered over Martin in his cheap suit. "You are done talking to my sister," Jonah said. His voice was low, dangerous. Martin looked up at him, sneering. "Excuse me." "You heard me," Jonah said. "You don't get to threaten us anymore. You don't get to come to our house. You don't get to mention our parents. You are done." Martin stared at him. He looked for the fear that had always been there, the deference of the working class to the wealthy. He found none. "Get out of my way." Martin spat. Jonah didn't move. "Walk away." "Martin, while you still can." Martin looked at Jonah, then at me, then at Daniel. He saw a wall of unity that his money couldn't buy and his threats couldn't break. He adjusted his cuffs, sneered one last time, and walked around Jonah. We watched him disappear down the hallway, a small, diminished figure in a lonely corridor. Jonah let out a long breath and turned to me. He was trembling, but he was smiling. "I have wanted to do that since 2004, he said. I hugged him. I hugged him harder than I had ever hugged anyone. "Thank you," I whispered. The aftermath was a blur of negotiations. With the threat of a criminal investigation looming, the district attorney had indeed taken an interest in the recording. Martin's resolve collapsed. He wanted to avoid prison more than he wanted to keep the money. A settlement was reached 3 weeks later. It was not the full amount that had been stolen over 32 years. Much of that had been squandered on bad investments and lavish living. But it was substantial. It was enough to ensure that I would never have to worry about a mortgage again. It was enough to ensure Lily could go to any university she wanted. But I had conditions. I sat in a conference room with Margaret and the new lawyers for Keen Dynamics. "I want 50% of the recovered assets to go into a trust for Lily." I said. Margaret nodded. "That is wise. And I want a portion of the remainder to be used for a scholarship fund." I said. Margaret's pen hovered over the paper, in whose name I took a deep breath. "The Lane Price Memorial Scholarship." I said. Margaret looked up, surprised. "It is for students from low-income backgrounds who want to study nursing or automotive repair." I said, "And it honors 3 people, Rebecca Lane, Thomas Price, and Elaine Price." Margaret's eyes softened. She understood. It was a way to weave the broken strands of my history together, to acknowledge that I was made of all 3 of them, the biological mother who gave me life, and the adoptive parents who gave me a home. "Done," Margaret said. She reached across the table and took my hand. "You are a remarkable woman. Eleanor, Rebecca would be proud." "And my parents?" I asked. Margaret smiled. "They would be relieved. The secret is out. The debt is paid." The drive back to Maple Ridge that afternoon felt different. The gray winter sky had cleared, leaving a crisp, brilliant blue. The snow on the pines glittered in the sun. Daniel drove. I sat in the passenger seat, watching the familiar landmarks roll by, the diner, the high school, the turnoff to the auto shop, which was now run by a manager Jonah had hired. "We need to talk about Lily," Daniel said quietly. I looked at him. "What about her?" "She is going to hear things," Daniel said. "People in town talk. The kids at school will hear their parents talking about the Keen heiress. We need to decide what to tell her." I thought about the conversation we had the night I found the key. "I think we should just tell her that Mommy came into some money from a relative," Daniel suggested. "Keep it vague. She is 4. Eleanor. She doesn't need to know about coercion and fraud and secret adoptions. We should protect her innocence a little longer." I shook my head. "No, Daniel." I said. He glanced at me. "No," I looked out the window at the passing houses. "I grew up in a house where protection looked like silence." I said, "My father thought he was protecting me by locking that cabinet. My mother thought she was protecting me by hiding the truth about my birth. And all it did was create a void where the truth should have been. It made me feel like there was something wrong with me, something too dangerous to be spoken." I turned to face him. "I am not going to do that to Lily." I said, "I am not going to let her grow up wondering why people whisper when she walks into a room." "So what do we tell her?" Daniel asked. "We tell her the truth." I said, "An age-appropriate truth. We tell her that I was adopted. We tell her that I have 2 families, the Prices who raised me, and the Keens who helped me. We tell her that there was a disagreement about money, but we fixed it. And the cabinet Daniel asked, the cabinet is part of the story." I said. We pulled into the driveway. The house looked the same as it always had, white clapboard, green shutters, But it felt different to me now. It no longer felt like a place of secrets. It felt like mine. We went inside. Lily was in the living room with Mrs. Higgins. She ran to us, squealing, and I scooped her up. She smelled of crayons and apple juice. "Did you fix the bad man?" she asked. She had picked up bits and pieces of our conversations over the weeks. "Yes, baby," I said, kissing her cheek. We fixed it. That evening, after dinner, I went down to the basement alone. I brought a shredder with me and a new file box. The cabinet was still open. The false bottom pried up. It looked like a wound. I started to work. I took the duplicate bank statements, the endless records of family support and consulting fees, and I fed them into the shredder. Whir, whir. The sound was therapeutic. I was destroying the evidence of the crime, turning the years of anxiety into harmless confetti. I shredded the letters from Clifford Ames. I shredded the threatening notes, but I kept the originals. I took a clean, archival quality folder. I placed the private support agreement inside. It was a historical document now, proof of where I came from. I placed the hospital bracelet, Baby Girl Lane. I placed the photo of Rebecca and Luke. I placed the letters Rebecca had written to me. And finally, I placed the letter from my mother, Elaine, and the digital recorder. I put the folder into the cedar box Margaret had given me. Then, I turned to the cabinet. I cleaned it. I wiped down the shelves with wood polish until they shone. I swept out the dust from the false bottom and hammered the plank back into place. I placed the cedar box on the center shelf. Next to it, I placed a framed photo of Thomas and Elaine Price, taken on their 25th anniversary. They were smiling, oblivious to the storm that would eventually consume them. But happy in that moment, I stood back. The cabinet was no longer a tomb. It was a museum. It held the history of my family, the messy, complicated, painful, and beautiful history. I closed the doors. I picked up the old brass padlock. I hesitated. Should I lock it? I looked at the key in my hand. Yes, not to keep people out, but to keep the memories safe. I clicked the lock shut. I went upstairs. Daniel was getting Lily into her pajamas. She was wearing her favorite ones with the astronauts on them. "Mummy, read me a story," she asked. "Of course," I said. I sat on the edge of her bed. The room was warm, lit by the soft glow of her nightlight. As I reached for her book, Lily looked at me. Her eyes drifted to the hallway, toward the basement door. "Mummy," she asked. "Yes, sweetie." "Is the locked one still scary?" she asked. I looked at her. I thought about the fear that had defined my relationship with that cabinet for 33 years. I thought about the monster I had expected to find inside, and the flawed, loving humans I had found instead. I smiled at her. I smoothed the hair back from her forehead, a forehead that looked like Luke Keene's, and Thomas Price's, and mine. "No, Lily," I said softly. "It is not scary anymore." "Why?" she asked. "Because we know what is inside now," I said. I leaned down and kissed her nose. "It is still locked," I said, "but now it is just a box, and everything inside it belongs to us. It is our story." Lily seemed satisfied with that. She settled back into her pillows, closing her eyes. "Read, Mummy," she murmured. I opened the book and began to read. But my mind was already writing the next chapter of our lives, a chapter without secrets, a chapter where the doors were open and the truth, no matter how complicated, was the only inheritance that mattered. Thank you so much for listening to She Said Don't Open the Locked One. Daddy, what was inside had been hidden for 32 years. I would love to know where you are listening from, so please leave a comment below sharing your location. If you enjoyed Eleanor's journey from secrecy to truth, please make sure to subscribe to Revenge Stories so you never miss an episode. I also invite you to share your thoughts on the story in English in the comments section. I read every single one. Thank you for your support, and I will see you in the next story.